Okay, welcome back everyone to for the second half of the program. We will have a few folks here who will be shuffling and taking their seats, but it is 9:45 and I'd like us to stick to the schedule, so I'm going to start. So far we've covered in some detail cases and statutory research. We're now going to look at regulatory research, and for that we have Mark from the DU Law Library. Thank you, Mark.
Hello, everyone. For those watching the webinar, I will try very, very hard not to move a whole lot, but I might. So I'm here today to talk about regulatory research, which is, there we go, which is a very important and critical part of legal research. It's kind of a puzzle, think of it that way. We're covering a wide variety of different areas. So, for example, constitutional, statutory, case, regulatory. They're all individual pieces of the puzzle. They're all very important. And agency-created material can be hugely beneficial in terms of not only filling out your understanding of the law, what's binding law, what, all the details that, might have been like some overview information in like the Constitution, some additional details in statutes. You'll get a lot more detailed stuff in regulations, but agencies also produce a lot of other content that is just fantastic for researchers. So, okay. So what I'm going to be talking about today is, again, agencies really are important to understand what kind of material they produce, how to research it, what kind of different values that they have. Sometimes in legal education, it actually gets a little bit of a short shrift, but it really is hugely important. Talk about different kinds of material. So in addition to regulations, there's a lot of other content out there. There's guidance that they produce, there's data sets, there's reports that are issued, you can do research on individuals, companies, properties, so forth. So there's a lot of different kinds of information you can get from government websites, specifically agency websites. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but first I wanted to, again, highlight the overall structure. And so while I'm kind of using Colorado as a model, this is really applicable, this general pattern, to pretty much all the states, federal as well, where, again, the Constitution is the supreme law of the lands, the supreme law of the state. So we have the Colorado Constitution. Again, Colorado Constitution is a little bit different from the federal Constitution because it can be modified through ballot initiatives and so forth. So we get a lot of different amendments. Prime example recently was the retail marijuana constitutional amendment. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of, well, okay, so you had that amendment passed and it modified the Constitution. But if you look at the constitutional amendment, it doesn't have a whole lot of details about, well, how is this going to be handled, implementation, and so forth. The Colorado legislature did pass statutes which added additional clarification, much more granular details, but then it was still the role of agencies to fill in a lot more of those details, procedures, what are requirements, and so forth. So it's important to understand that, each one of these different bodies plays an important function. So the Constitution, legislative, executive, and judicial derive their legal authority from that constitutional authority. Again, judicial cases, legislative, we usually think of it just as statutes and so forth, and they'll do investigations. But agency power is actually derived from delegation of legislative authority. So they're saying, we don't have the time to take care of all these little details and so forth, because we have other important things to do with the statutes. We're not really experts that can go and, fill out all the details of particular niche aspects of the law. So what we're going to do is we're going to delegate our authority to agencies. And agencies fall under the executive branch. So governor, president, person, generally in charge, but again, the authority is coming from the legislative powers. And so agencies, they produce a lot of different content. I've listed some examples. We're going to focus on regulations and guidance in this presentation. But when you're doing research, like you can go to a lot of different websites, like the SEC website and so forth, and you'll see a lot of material related to like them doing investigations. You'll see things like, well, what about administrative court decisions, that kind of stuff. You'll find it's amazing how much government information is out there and how much great content you can find. I'm also the GovDocs librarian for DU, so I talk about government information. But in addition to that, again, you can get a lot of fantastic material, and I cover a little bit of it later in the presentation. But again, thinking about, well, what these agencies, in addition to them passing laws, they're also either required or as part of their function or to provide a service to the population of Colorado. They're gathering data. They're processing data. You can potentially access raw data. You could potentially access government reports on information. Again, you can look up. You could go to the Colorado website that deals with mining and look up a lot of companies, their natural resources, like where are they mining, in what county, what are they doing, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of great information that's available from agencies, legal material and kind of law-related material as well. So a lot of good material from agencies. So again, I mentioned they derive their authority from the legislative, it's a legislative delegation of authority. And one of the main responsibilities of agencies is to promulgate regulations. And when we're talking about regulations, we're talking about something that has binding legal authority. So think of it as, having kind of the same power as like a statute or a case that is binding on lower courts, or the Constitution being binding on, the governmental functions and the people of Colorado. Think of it that way. Regulations are hugely important. Now, you could run into a situation where, a statute is completely valid, 100% constitutional, but regulations promulgated under that statute might not be constitutional. It might go through the courts, and they might say, well, some of the regulations might be valid, other regulations might not be. So again, you can see the same exact thing where we're talking about binding legal authority, but it also might be struck down, might be repealed, so forth. Regulations, just like other areas of law, it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, and that's one of the things that we always try to reinforce with our law students, is that the law is very dynamic. That's the important reason, in terms of what I emphasize, updating cases, but also updating all the other kind of legal content as well. You want to make sure you're relying on good law. And so the regulatory process goes through several stages in terms of publication. And again, this is fairly consistent across jurisdictions, where you have the initial publication, and this occurs in the Colorado Register in this state. And so what happens is, well, we want to make sure that people know what's going on, what the agencies are doing. And so they're required to make this information available to the public, not just when, a regulation has been enacted, but when they're thinking of, putting forth a regulation. So they're proposing a regulation. So that has to be published, go through a comment period, and ultimately, if it becomes a final regulation, then, okay, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about that binding legal authority, a final regulation. But if you try to research, I think they've already covered codification, where you take material as it's been passed and then take it and kind of chop it up and put it into into topical sections so it's easier to research. That's what ends up happening, just like with statutes, with regulations as well. And this is done in the Code of Colorado Regulations, the CCR. So all the final regulations that are published in the Colorado Register get moved into the relevant topical area in the Code of Colorado Regulations. There's some slight differences between the CCR and the federal equivalent. I'll mention it briefly, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware. Generally speaking, it's more or less topically oriented. But in addition to this binding legal authority, they produce a lot of guidance as well. It's like, okay, I'm looking at the statutory material, I'm looking at the regulatory material. There's some ambiguity here. I have a particular situation. I don't know how to deal with it. it might go this way, it might go that way. I don't want them to come investigate me, sue me, lose a lot of money. So, one of the things that I can do is go and ask an agency for guidance. Or if an agency recognizes, well, there is ambiguity or there's a gap in the law here, they might produce, again, kind of information that's like, well, if you're dealing in this particular kind of legal situation, one of the things that you're going to encounter, if you're encountering this, this, and this, well, we would say handle it this way, or no, that's going to be illegal, or no, we would probably be fine with that. So it's kind of that gap filling, kind of giving a little bit of reassurance, and attorneys do use it to supplement their legal research. So again, it's not binding necessarily. Some kinds of guidance can have more persuasive impact than others, but a lot of it, again, not binding, but still can be very useful. And agencies have a lot of other important authorities that are delegated to them as well. Investigating things that happen. Well, we think that the regulations that we've promulgated are being violated by a particular offender. We're going to go investigate that. And there's, again, a lot of administrative process in place. But agencies really do play a huge role in our modern legal system. Okay. So this chart is kind of stepping you through the permanent rulemaking process in Colorado. It'll be, again, fairly similar to other jurisdictions as well. But one of the big things to just take away is that, they have to publish the initial proposed rule that they're going to have, proposed regulation. And it has to go through kind of like a public process where, all right, we recognize there's a lot of good things with this particular regulation, but there's some things we don't like. Maybe there's some gaps. Maybe we think there's an overreach here. Or maybe we just don't like that regulation at all, and a lot of people are strongly opposed to it. It's basically the public's opportunity to go say, hey, we want to, we don't want this regulation. We want some modification, or yeah, we're really in favor of it. And it kind of goes through that process, and assuming that it reaches the final step, it will be a final enacted regulation. And so again, all that is published in the Colorado Register. And the federal equivalent is the Federal Register. So first, I'm actually going to focus on the Code of Colorado Regulations. Now, when you're talking about the Colorado Register and Colorado Code of Regulations, when you're conducting research, you're using them for two distinct purposes. Code of Colorado Regulations, again, that's the codification. So all those final regulations that are currently in force are compiled and put together in the Code of Colorado Regulations. Because if you were trying to research it by piecing together chronologically, stuff from 2012, 2008, 2004, and so forth, that would involve a lot of steps, additional steps in terms of research. Going through a codification really does make that a lot easier because, well, I want to find out, well, what is currently what is good law, or maybe at a particular time, what was the law that was on the book? So what was the good law on the books? And so one of the ways you can use that is the Colorado Code of Regulations, and again, previous editions of that as well. And so it's organized, again, generally topically. One of the distinctions between this and the Code of Federal Regulations, which goes by titles and major topics, is in terms of like the main hierarchy level, you're looking more at the different agencies. And so this is taken from the Code of Colorado Regulations free website. Again, it's a government website. You can get a lot of fantastic government information from these websites. Also, if you've ever been on a government website, you know that sometimes the search features aren't as awesome as we would like. So I will talk about, I'm assuming you've probably heard of or used Google Advanced in the past. If not, it's a fantastic resource. I'll mention it. It really is great for accessing government information, but also a wide variety of additional content as well. And so you can search, browse, and you also see a link right below that to the Colorado Register as well. And so here's the Colorado Code of Regulations. I believe I was able to fit all of it on. Hopefully I fit all of it on. But it's giving you an idea in terms of, well, what are the major major kind of divisions. So you're seeing a wide variety of different departments as the top level. So Department of Personnel and Administration, Department of Revenue, which is what we're going to be looking at, because that's the actual department under which regulation of retail and medical marijuana falls. But you can see Department of Law, Transportation, Human Services, Labor and Employment, etc. So again, still kind of topical, but more, main agency based is how the Colorado Code of Regulations is organized. And so you can see all those different numbers, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. My understanding is they tinkered around with some of the organization with it a while ago. So that you can see up until like around 1300, and then it starts going 1395, then it goes into 1500s individual sections, just the way they decided to number it. I don't have some great insight in terms of why it was the hundreds categories and why it went into individual numbers there. I'm sure somebody would be able to explain it to me, but just know that those are major numbering system for those broad categories, the agencies. And so I've clicked on one of them, going down the hierarchy. Here's the Department of Revenue. So you can see Colorado Racing Commission, the Taxpayer Services Division, motor vehicles, liquor enforcement. So the Department of Revenue covers a wide variety of different topics. And so again, it's that broad 200 category, but then when you get down to the smaller divisions, so these are subdivisions within that agency that we're looking at, there's some variation, but it's all part of the Department of Revenue, just different sections of the Department of Revenue. And so you can see the one that was added the most recently is 212, Marijuana Enforcement Division. And if you click on the Marijuana Enforcement Division link, see the CCR number and title. We have two options. We've got one CCR 212-1 and -2, which is, so the first one, rules regarding the sales, manufacturing, and dispensing of medical marijuana. And the second one is dealing with retail marijuana. So if I click on the retail marijuana, again, going down that next level, looking at it, you can see that not only can I access the current version of the retail marijuana code, so the regulatory code, all those little details in terms of, timing, in terms of, premises, premises has to be this large, have this many cameras, have these security features, so forth and so forth. You can find that kind of information in the regulations. And not only can you research the current version of the regulations, but you can go and look back at previous versions as well and see, what kind of filing type was it? So was it something they did like, oh, we recognize there's something really important that we need to do, might not have the time to go through the entire process, so like an emergency, or go through the full process, a permanent rule. So it's useful because a lot of times when you're doing regulatory research, it's helpful to know what the current version of the law is. But if you're looking at an incident that occurred at a particular historical time, wanting to know, what was the law at that time? Yes?
So do emergency rules tend to become permanent rules over time, or do they always be emergency rules?
I don't know the specific details with Colorado. Now, I know on the federal level, they have something equivalent called temporary regulations. And the temporary regulations used to be back, I believe, up until like 83 or something like that. You could have a temporary regulation that had foregone the regular regulatory process, and it stay on the books forever with nothing ever passed. But then they changed the law because, again, we want them to go through that full process. And so nowadays, if a temporary regulation is passed, it sunsets after 3 years. Because you have 3 years to go through that regulatory process to put in that permanent rule. The reason that we were allowing you to bypass that was because there was a compelling need. If we've given you 3 years, that compelling need, you have more than enough opportunity to put in the final regulation. So typically, that's one of the things where, there's a recognition that, there can be exigent circumstances where we need to go a lot faster than the time horizon that's involved in terms of because it could be many months, it could be a year or so with certain regulations for them from being proposed to when they actually finally see final regulation. So it can really vary. And so here's an example. Again, this is the retail marijuana code, and showing like different individual sections within that code you can go and look at. In terms of the citation, the CCR is in many, many different volumes. So you'll see the first number being the volume number, and then the Colorado Code of Regulations. And then what that second number is telling you is, again, it's telling you, well, what department, what agency department does it fall under, what major division, and it'll also give you an idea in terms of, well, what is the major topic that's being addressed in that particular regulatory section by that division. So again, one of the things that they try to do with legal research in terms of how they structure citations is they're not trying to hide the ball, they're trying to make it as accessible as possible. So there's a lot of similarities you'll see between, whether you're looking at statutes, regulations, cases, so forth. Because again, accessibility in terms of reading citations is really important. Colorado Register, see that it's published on looks like about every other week. At the federal level, it's typically published on weekdays, the Federal Register. Again, Colorado being a smaller jurisdiction than the federal government, less of a need for that consistent publication. Again, you can see here's the more recent ones, but also if you click on the back issues up there, select year, you can see you can access back to around 2006. Again, as you probably know, with a lot of content that's available online, a lot of times it only goes back so far, usually within the past decade or two. So, but if it's something more recent, again, you can access available electronically via HTML or PDF, and you can see the different issues. So, volume 38, Colorado Register, and that particular issue. And so, again, I clicked on a PDF of one of the Colorado Registers. See that it was the most recent one, 38 CR6. So volume 38, number 6, the date as well. And so it's going to be organized. You'll see this little title sheet for each each item saying, okay, well, how can I track this? Who's the one who's, what is this? This is a notice of proposed rulemaking. Well, what department is it? What agency? So the Division of Risk Management in this particular case. A lot of these useful, specific kind of details, keeping up to date, well, what's happening? And so one of the things that you were doing with the Code of Colorado Regulations is, well, what is the law as it is right now? Using Colorado Register, well, how is that law changing? So how, keeping up to date, well, if there's just been a permanent rule that's come into force, well, the Code of Colorado Regulations isn't 100% up to date. So it's changed. How has it changed? How would the person who's looking for this information need to make adjustments? Or say a proposed regulation coming forth. Well, how is this going to impact that particular individual? That would be something that can be very huge. Say it's it's a regulation dealing with companies and impacting, well, how do they handle with certain employment issues? Now, if there's a radical change to what the current law is, to what the subsequent law will be in terms of regulations, it can have a huge impact in terms of their internal procedures, whether their current procedures might open them up to legal liability, so forth. So keeping up to date on that kind of information is hugely important. And that's one of the main reasons that people would research something like the Federal Register or the Colorado Register, keeping up to date. But in addition to that regulatory material, and this little lightweight mouse just fell, so there's a lot of additional content that's available out there. So I went and clicked on the Department of Revenue. So this is the Colorado Department of Revenue, the Marijuana Enforcement Division. And again, you'll find similar kinds of materials across a bunch of different agencies. Agency websites will look different. Some will have more modern interfaces than others. It's a government website. This happens a lot. And so again, if somebody needed to actually apply for licenses, file taxes, that kind of stuff, they can get the information from an agency website. But you could also find, primary law. So what is the primary Colorado legal authority that's relevant to this particular division? So the Department of Revenue Enforcement Division, well, they've done some of the work for you and they've put it on their particular website. So it's a nice place to go in terms of, somebody's done that editorial work to kind of find the useful material. But also licenses, for example. So I'm going to show you, I clicked on each one of those boxes that I highlighted. The first one is that laws, so Constitution, laws, etc. And it did have all that stuff, but I actually scrolled down and I did a screen cap of some of that guidance material. So getting back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that it might not be binding legal authority, but you're running into, well, what are some breaking developments in the retail marijuana industry? How is that particular agency making adjustments? How would they suggest handling ambiguities in laws and so forth? And you can see, an industry bulletin and statements of position. And right underneath, I highlighted what each one of those are detailing. So they're giving you that kind of information. So again, you can find a lot of useful material, not just regulations, on these websites. And so this is one where I clicked on the licensee information. And so you can expand it and look at some of the compliance things. So there's a database that they have to go and make certain filings with the retail marijuana industry, so forth, whatnot. But there's also a lot of great data out there. So there's data sets, dealing with revenue, or how many different retail facilities are there, where are their growth facilities and so forth. But not just the data, you can actually go and find out what is the name of these places? Where are they physically located and so forth, as an example. So there's a lot of great material, again, on these agency websites. And so you can actually see at the bottom, they also have a list of registered medical marijuana vendors as of April 1st, 2015. So they're keeping that up to date. So again, you could see, well, who are the ones who are registered with this to produce medical marijuana? And so I clicked on two of those two links that I highlighted, and you can see, so you can look at specific sets for medical and retail, dealing with stores, dealing with centers, cultivation facilities, so forth, in PDL and Excel format. And one of the things that always run across when doing government research is that the search features can be a little questionable at times. Finding content sometimes can be a little hard to navigate. A lot of the agency websites, progressively they're updating to modern interfaces, but a lot of them at times you look at it and go, wow, it's like 1996, isn't it? So, yeah, so I mean, if you haven't used Google Advanced Search before, it really is a fantastic resource. I think I'm preaching to the choir. Probably everyone has used it here. You plug in government website, and again, you can use it with not just government, .coms, .orgs, whatnot. I could do just a domain, but in Colorado, there's actually two variants of the government website domain, and this was something I only learned a year or so ago. So, depending on what you're searching for Colorado government material, trying searching both of them, so the state.co.us and colorado.gov, you can specify specific kinds of documents to search. A lot of government material is made available in PDF. If you find that just searching the domain, you're getting some irrelevant results, you might try using that to target your search a little more. So yeah, I use Google Advanced Search a lot, and I do push it on my students as well. And the last slide is, so covered a lot. We're covering a lot today. But in addition to being great resources for the actual material, the various libraries, so regulations, statutes, access to databases, DU does make available a lot of its databases available to the public. We also have West Public Terminal as well. Research guides. Research guides are fantastic. So I've included 3 links. So DU's Colorado Administrative Legal Research Guide, CU's as well. And I love the Law Library of Congress website, where the Guide to Law Online, because it's basically will tell you at federal, state level, even international, even some indigenous tribes, where you can go to access statutory, regulatory, constitutional, a lot of government information for free online. So I need to find Colorado regulations. Oh, here's a link for it. I can just, and it'll offer multiple options. It'll also list some research guides as well. So I think it's a fantastic resource, and I try to plug it whenever I get a chance. So my time is up. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing today? Good. Okay. My name is Mike Martinez. I'm the non-Colorado person in the group here today. So I was involved with the Legal Information Services to the Public, which was part of the Southwestern Association of Law Libraries. And so Robert was very fundamental in putting this kind of thing together, since our conference is actually starting at 12 o'clock today. So this is the beginning portion. It's like the precursor to what the events that are going to happen for the next couple of days for us. And so I was just very glad that we had such a good turnout here today and also online. So in my time before you today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal law. It says federal law in Colorado, but really we're talking about federal law in general. Okay, so it's very generalized. And, you know, my biggest thing is, of course, you kind of see me wanting to kind of start moving around and everything. I really like to get engaged with folks. So I tried to pare down my slides as best I can to about maybe 13 to 15 slides, just things that are kind of helpful. And so you might want to go on to some of the sites that I have linked in there to kind of help you along with the process and everything else. So what you're going to find out about what we've been covering all today is the fact that law is the reflection of society at any given time. Okay, so you think about those kinds of things, law being the reflection. You know, we just heard right now from Mark that it's dynamic, right? So it's constantly changing and constantly evolving to keep up with what's going on. And you see that kind of stuff in terms of the different precedential cases that come about, people's interpretations of things, regulatory changes that happen, legislative changes that happen within Colorado. All of these things, they kind of reflect what's going on right now. Okay, and the biggest overarching thing, if you look at a couple of graphics and that sort of thing from before, is there's the Constitution. Now, we didn't really have a graphic for that, but if you think about it in terms of the things that Robert brought forward and Karina brought forward as well, and even Scott, you can think about it in terms of the Constitution sort of being the overarching kind of theme of what's going on within there. They sort of establish forms and the limitations of government. They're sort of what bases everything on, you know. So as you're kind of developing the different three branches, they kind of have a nod to what's happening within there because of constitutions. And they provide the scope of the legislation that kind of comes about. So they're sort of forming things. And that's why you can see them at the state level in Colorado, also in the federal level as well, right? So that's kind of the thing there. And the type of authority, we've talked a lot about authority and such. It is primary mandatory authority in your jurisdiction. Okay, so that's what it kind of means for constitutions. This was kind of generically put there together in terms of all constitutions, but we know the Constitution itself is the law of the land, so that's kind of what we think of when we think of this. The text of the Constitution hasn't really changed much over the years, but the interpretations of what happens have. Okay, so here's kind of my example of that, and here's kind of what I pulled up off just regular old find law. I wanted to find the First Amendment, right? And so I read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So how do we get from this kind of statement to the fact whether or not a professor holds the speech that they give in a grade, whether or not that is actually speech? Right? So if we're looking at cases and things like that, where do we go to from that if we're trying to say that at city council meetings you can hold prayer at the beginning of meetings, right? How do we get to that from just the idea of that only statement? And it's through the cases and things that kind of come about that establish more meaning to it. You think of the idea of the Constitution just as an example, but as the idea of any of these federal laws as a table. It's the information that's kind of put out there, but the legs on the table itself are primarily put on by the cases that kind of come out, giving more meaning, more understanding. So that's how you sort of flush out what the meaning is in any particular part of what's going on. That's why we look towards, it's not enough to have what it says in the First Amendment, but we look to precedential cases, the United States Supreme Court, and see what it is that they have. And if we're not at a time where we can actually look at it, say we're looking at the Garcetti case in 2006 to try to establish whether a professor holds the right in giving the grade as free speech, we have to look at that through circuit court cases and the delineation of what's going on in their interpretation of what the Supreme Court has said. It's filtered through those types of processes. So it's a really big kind of step, and it's a really big process. The next thing I have there is the idea that constitutions are thoroughly abstracted by subject and extensively indexed. That's for things like the United States Code Annotated, United States Code Service, other things, because as things are going on, we want information, right? Lawyers, people, anyone we talk to, they wanted the information yesterday. They don't want it when they come in today to come see you, right? So what they want is you're going to look towards something like the United States Code Annotated or the United States Code Service in order to find out more information, because we're looking for annotations. We're looking for any other kind of material where people have done work for us, right? West, Lexis, those folks put that material together and they give us cross-reference materials. It's no, you know, it's like we know they're going to have books talking to each other, or if we have the luxury of having Westlaw Next or any of those things kind of cross-reference and link together, right? So that's kind of the way things kind of work out within there. In terms of the federal statutes themselves, the United States Congress meets in 2-year terms, and each term has 2 annual sessions, okay? So there's several hundred statutes that kind of get enacted throughout the term, and the act is passed as either a public law or a private law. So I have kind of the information here, and a lot of the same situations in terms of what we saw from Karina's presentation on how it kind of worked its way through in the different ways as things were introduced and went through the whole process. That's at the same kind of process that we're going to see at the federal level as well. And if anybody remembers Schoolhouse Rock, it has the whole thing of how a bill becomes a law. Now, the problem with all this is the fact that there's research difficulty here. The laws as they're coming out, they're going to be published in chronological order, and for the problem is you can't index that. It's kind of hard to find that. It's like getting everything you would have had at the legislative session and trying to find and work your way into it, right? And so that's the biggest problem that we find as researchers. And they want to know what's actually the law that's currently in force and whether or not it's been amended, or whether the law is related, or how things kind of come together. And the solution to that is codification. So now we've got all these small little pieces of paper, right? Little leaves in our librarian world, and they gather these all together, and at the end of session, they'll put them in something called the Statutes at Large. But the problem with that is also the difficulty in researching. So in order to break them up by title, that's how we can find more information. That's where we can find things in the United States Code, which is the official. So here are the 3 publication levels that kind of happened, and these may be the 3 entry points that people may come to talk to you about things, right? The first one is going to be a slip law, which is issued in a single pamphlet or a little leaf of paper, right? A lot of time it's going to have the Pub L number on it. So Pub L 114-1 would be that first particular law that's being enacted, or as it's trying to go through the process. The next part would be to have anything in the session laws, right? Arranged by date, or the published in a separate volume for each term of the legislature. Now, the official publication itself is done by the government, so it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. It's going to happen a long time from now. That's why we look towards commercial vendors, right? We look at USCCAN, things like that, in order to see what's actually happening at that time. And then the other place that we have, when everything's all said and done, the United States Code in its 52 titles have all of the different subjects that kind of break it down. So there are 3 entry points from which we can look for things, and sometimes you'll have 3 different citations that people will come to you with. A lot of times, though, what they'll come to you with is, I want the act of XYZ, and then you'll have another way to kind of enter that in there. Okay, so here's kind of the numbering and the information that I had within there. Some ideas for the slip laws and how to find that. In its official capacity, we could look at gpo.gov to look as it's coming out, right? We can look at the statutes at large themselves in order to see what's going on at the end of session, all those leafs gathered together in chronological order. And then also the process of the codification in which they've arranged them in a way that we could look at them in 52 different specific titles. So the official code itself has the 52 titles, and it's kind of broken down. The problem again, though, is in its official capacity, the United States Code is published every 6 years. So we won't actually have the official, I think it was 06, 12, and then 6 from there, 6, 8. So it'd be 2018 that we'd have the official. That's why we are able to have things like United States Code Annotated or United States Code Service, or spoiled folks like us have Westlaw and Lexis, right? So we're able to kind of get through there and work in and out in there. And of course, the important part about it is we always want those things provided by a secondary kind of group and publisher, because again, it's not enough just to have what the law says, but we want to know, what does it really mean? Maybe in there it references a law review article where it kind of explains what's going on within there. That's one thing. Maybe in there it'll have a couple of cases that talk about it. So now we have a little more understanding of what it means when they flushed out the language, right? So those are the kinds of things that we look for. we look for other things other than the official code itself. And that's what the official code itself kind of contains. Text of the statute, historical notes, maybe some research aids, but not a lot of information. So it's important for us to try to find information in another place, okay? I have here a website for you guys as well to look for. Again, gpo.gov is a great resource to have a lot of information. But to me, a good way to look at things is in the Office of Law Revision Counsel. So if you look at the Law Revision Counsel, there's a lot of entry points in here. So if folks come in and they say, I'm looking for the XYZ Act of 2011, right? We can look in here on a popular name table, find out where it is, go in there, and within there it'll have the pub law number, it may have the statute at large number, and even where it's been codified. So now we have an entry point to gather any more information that we might want about that particular rule. Let's say, for example, someone comes to you and says, I was on the Price is Right, and I got a jet ski, and I want to know whether or not that's something that I have to claim on my taxes, right? So we look in here, we look at the search engine, we have the ability to look in an advanced search, which is within the titles. It has field searching, it has Boolean searching. This kind of gives you a little heads up as to what's going on in there and ways to search within there. But if I know what's going on, and I know that Title 26 covers the Internal Revenue Code, I might want to look up something like Title 26 to narrow it down, and prizes to see what a prize kind of comes out at. And what you'll find is it kind of brings out the information on it, and it tells you what part of the United States Code and what section specifically talks about prizes and awards. So now we have an entry point to kind of look at this to see what types of things qualify. And we can search by the order of the code or by relevance. And so we can see right here, this is going to be the most current material that we have in any version, and it's easy to access. You can go back and forth within particular things. If, like again, if law is a reflection of society at any given time, maybe I want to see what happened in a particular time frame. So I can go backwards within there from this drop-down menu and go within there to see it. Other things that you can use at libraries, like at CU and at DU, I'm sure they have Hein Online. Hein Online is another methodology by which we do that. So when folks from Law Journal want to come and say, hey, I need this specific pagination, and I see them carrying the books, I'm like, no, let's go to Hein, let's look where we can find that. We can find the digital copy of what it is that we need to make sure we're following exactly what that particular author said or the person that we're looking for. What we can also find here for federal legislation, we have pending legislation at the United States Senate. You can go through there to see what kind of things are coming about. And also at one time we had something called Thomas, but they've replaced that now with congress.gov. And within congress.gov, we can search within there to see a lot of the things in the language that kind of comes about in any of these introduced legislations. So at the bottom of it, you can actually see this is what was proposed. Now it's in this next phase. Here's what the things are going on. So that at the end of it, when it's signed into law, you can have a history of what's going on. So it gives us a little bit more of that legislative history of what's taken place along that path. Okay. Here's kind of another graphic, and it kind of goes into a lot of the materials that are there, what's on the actual site itself, and it kind of has some stuff. So when you have time to kind of look a little bit more at it, they've been kind of tooling it up over time to show more materials and to show more things. Now, I know it's a lot of material in a short amount of time, but what should you take away from this? Feel free to go to the Office of Law Revision Counsel to kind of see what they have and what they offer. Go to things like the Legal Information Institute to see what the law is just in general. Maybe even find law or something that you're kind of comfortable with to find these things. But then look to other things like the United States Code Annotated or the United States Code Service because of those specific annotations to give you more information, to cross-reference things for you, and to help you open up your search. So that's my time before you today. A lot in a short amount, but thank you for your time. Okay.
So have we confused you completely? I hope not. My name is Margie Heinen, and I'm going to ask your indulgence in two ways. Unlike everybody else who's been speaking to you today, I happen to work for a law firm. So I am a law librarian at Sherman and Howard in downtown Denver. So if I start to talk in lawyerese, or if I'm saying something that makes absolutely no sense to you, wave your hand, tell me what your problem is. Secondly, I have some notes that I'm going to keep with me just so that I don't forget to tell you certain things. So please forgive me. We're sort of letting you take a big jump down a Colorado mountain right now, because we're going from federal law of the land stuff, to local government, right down here to your library district or something on a very basic level. But we don't want you to forget about local government when a patron comes in and says, I want the law on. Because that question is what we've been talking about all morning. What is the law on? It could be anything. It could be legislative, it could be judicial, it could be regulatory, and it can be local government. So don't forget us. Just to remind you where we've been. Federal at the top, then the state, and now we're talking local government. Local government can be counties. Colorado has 64 of them. When somebody comes in and talks about counties, as we talked before about jurisdiction, is something federal or state or local. For a county, it may be, what side of the street are you on? So remember that when you're doing legal research, you are doing an awful lot of what we used to call in library school reference interviews, because you have to really make sure you know what that patron's talking about. So on a county level, where do you live? What side of the street? What do we need to know from you? Secondly, municipalities. There's an organization called the Colorado Municipal League. And if you're not aware of it, you should know about it, because they produce a lot of publications that explain how cities work. So if you're wondering about taxes in cities, you're wondering about how you annex land to a city, the Colorado Municipal League is a place to know about. Also in Colorado, we have a lot of special districts. The type of district that comes to mind most frequently for me is an attorney will ask me, how do I get a permit for a sewer or some kind of sewer-like facility up in the mountains? And often in mountain communities, that kind of development is regulated by a special district, and it's a sanitation district. So sometimes it's not a county or it's not a municipality, but you might be looking for something very specialized. So what do these various localities regulate? All sorts of stuff. And it's all nitty-gritty stuff. As Mike mentioned, you know, there might be a statute or a constitutional statement that's very broad. In Colorado, yeah, okay, we can have marijuana, right? But that's not going to describe the wheres and the hows and the whys. So individual cities, individual localities can say, we don't want any more retail marijuana shops in our city. And they have the authority to stop that. So depending what your patron's looking for, you might be looking at the local regulations. These are just a list of some of them. Quite often you'll have patrons who have, sorry about that guys, have a problem with noise, barking dogs, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that hits you in the middle of the night. That's what cities and counties deal with. There's a lot more than just this list. Now, what does this form look like for cities? Charters, again, think constitutions. Charters say things like, we're going to have a city manager, and we're going to have a mayor, and we're going to have a city council, and da-da-da. But that, again, doesn't get down to the nitty-gritty. Then they will have ordinances, and in that case, think legislation. Just like we talked about Colorado legislation going through a bill process, a city can have a proposed ordinance. They can have some hearings on that ordinance. They may publish some stuff about that ordinance, and then the city council will vote on it. Those ordinances, just as Mike just said, come out chronologically. So when the council meets today, maybe they're going to talk about leash laws and marijuana. Again, you're going to have to figure out, how do I find those ordinances in a subject matter? And we'll talk about that. Also think about some of the guidance that we talked about both for regulation and in other matters. Sometimes cities are very reluctant to publish a lot of this stuff. They may be understaffed. They may feel they're very busy. They may feel like, why does anybody need to know? All they have to do is call me. I'll tell them, right? So sometimes, unlike all this other stuff that we've been finding magnificently on the web, sometimes you have to call a municipality or a county in order to really get your question answered. And so don't be afraid to say to the patron, I'm sorry, this one you're going to have to call and see what you can find out. I started my law librarian career in Detroit, Michigan, which is in Wayne County. And we always had to call Ron. Why did we have to call Ron? Because he had the file cabinet for Wayne County, and everything was in the file cabinet. So that can still exist today. So everything is not on the web in regards to local government. Also, minutes. And you might think, why in the world has she included minutes up here? As we mentioned, we want to know what the state of the law is today. But maybe I built my house 10 years ago. And I want to argue that I followed the law 10 years ago and I should be grandfathered in. How do I find that law 10 years ago? Cities and counties are not notoriously good about putting archival stuff on the web. But sometimes you can look up the city council minutes and find out what went on at a certain time, and that will help you move backwards in time. Now, when we're looking for city and county, mostly city codes, there are a couple of publishers who have accumulated codes, and these are the easiest places to find stuff. MuniCode is one. American Legal, Conway Green, and Sterling are the names that come to mind most frequently. And these websites publish lots of codes. So you can pull up the state of Colorado and see all the cities that have their codes in MuniCode. The advantage of that is seen on this particular slide. You can see that up there in the corner, they give you the website for the city itself. So that's helpful if you want to see what the city website is. You also see that it tells you when this was codified and how current it is. Because heaven forbid you run a Google search, and everybody has said it here, I'll say it as well. Great place to start, horrible place to finish up. You can pull up an ordinance. You can say, Denver City Ordinance Marijuana. And wow, a PDF may appear. There may not be a date on the PDF. It may say exactly what your patron wants it to say, but it may be 6 years ago. So the wonderful thing about things like MuniCode is they put up there what was the ordinance, what was the date of that ordinance, and how current is this material that you're looking at right now. Does it include 2015, or did they finish updating in December? So that's why I sort of like these codifiers, so that it's clean, we know what everything looks like. And along the side there, you can just link down to the subject you're interested in. It's very clean. You may, however, have to just go city by city in some instances, or you may want to see what the city website looks like. Remember, it can be incredibly chaotic because every city gets to do it the way they want to do it. Nobody's saying, gosh, every city website should have their code. Or gosh, every city website should have their treasurer called a treasurer instead of revenue or something else. So it's going to be a little chaotic, and warning, those updates are going to be, it's going to be unclear how current something is. City of Denver happens to be quite helpful. But for those of us like myself, who's used to thinking in legal terms, when I look at those tabs across the top, I think, I don't know, where's the code going to be? Is it under government, or is it what do I want to find? Or is it under something else? So sometimes the terminology will be different depending on your patron. If an attorney comes in, they're going to say, why doesn't it just say code? And another person might say, well, I have no idea. How would I find it? So every city can do this a little differently. Denver doesn't do a bad job. You'll notice that they indicate the city council, and that's where you're going to find minutes. And they also indicate bills, laws, and the municipal code. So that's nice and clean for us. Now, as I said, everybody can do things differently. This happens to be a county website. And when I was looking at it, a couple of things struck me. One is lots of materials on the municipal and county level use a phrase that causes us all to cringe, and that is incorporated by reference. That means that when you see a building code, somebody will say, well, I want to know how tall my windows can be. I want to go floor to ceiling with my windows. Can I do that? And you click in there, it says, here's the building code. Windows, incorporated by reference, the International Building Code. They don't link to the International Building Code. So often you'll find codes, especially in building and electrical codes and that kind of thing, they may incorporate by reference another code that is not city or municipality, but is more general than that, and that many cities have adopted. So you then may have to link out and find some other resources for that. So it's not just a one-stop shop often. The other thing I found humorous about this particular website, there on the left-hand side, you'll notice they have something called Code of the West. I thought, Code of the West. Is that their their county code? No. It's to help y'all who have never been in the West learn how it is to live in the West. So under that code, it says things like, when you live in a rural area, you won't have electricity at night, or whatever your situation is. You may not let your dogs run wild, or you may let your dogs run wild. Or here's what neighbors expect if you live in the West. There's nothing legal about it, but it is trying to help a new person to this community understand how the community functions. I guess we could call it guidance, because I don't think it has the authority of mandatory primary law, but it's a very humorous little section on this particular website, and it does give a new person in the community an idea of how to function in that community. One of the things that we struggle with, as I said, about municipal stuff is how to get back into the older material. And it's not always easy. Sometimes the clerk's office will have something. Sometimes the city council will go back in time with some minutes, and that's helpful. But I'm going to recommend that other libraries in your area might be the best place to be. So if you are already working in a public library, let me tell you that frequently I am calling you and saying, do you have anything back to 1996 for the municipal code? Because the city is likely to not have it easily available. They may have it, but it's not so quick to find. One of the things Denver has done, which is very nice, but I can't tell you that every city does it, they do have their ordinances and documents available back in time. And so you'll notice here, the immediate search is back to 2010, but you can click on archives and get even further back. And this kind of thing can be very helpful because you're trying to track the history of some ordinance or how something came about. And so rarely, but sometimes, cities will allow for this kind of really excellent research. This website is more like the kind of thing that I hunt for frequently. I need to go back in time. I have to go to Douglas County or whatever county it is, see if that library or that historical collection has anything on the topic, and I have to really dig through library resources. So if you're ever looking at your collection and you think, do we really need this sort of ratty binder of falling apart ordinances? Please think, yes, maybe we do. Maybe we ought to be the people who keep it. If you can digitalize it, that would be even more magnificent. But know that this kind of material is not easily found. Sometimes we're looking for materials in a collection. Somebody wants to know, what are all the cities in Colorado that allow for retail marijuana? Those kinds of things can be very difficult to find on a municipal level. There is something called the National Association of Counties. So sometimes you can look at that and see, well, how do counties deal with trends? That can be something like cameras for police officers or something. You know, maybe they've done a report on the various counties in a state or city area and how they deal with a particular topic. United States Conference of Mayors might lead you to something like that as well. And then, for instance, marijuana, you may have to find a special interest group that's going to care. So NORML actually does do a lot of surveys of who does what with marijuana, what are the regulations, who's considering it next, that kind of stuff. So again, in the area of something like cameras for police officers, you might want to be thinking of Federation of Police or something and see if you can find some reports that somebody has done, because it's not so likely that the municipalities as an individual will do that kind of report. Now, we've been talking about in our agenda and in our presentations the various areas of government. So we've had legislative, and we've had regulatory or executive, and we've had judiciary. And on the county level, there of course is judiciary as well. And as we saw from a previous slide, some of those trial courts, they don't publish their opinions, but they do get press coverage. So you will get clients coming in saying, what about that guy who worked for Dish Network and he smoked marijuana on his day off? I don't remember the name. I'm sure it went to court. I want to find that court case. Well, none of those lower court decisions are indexed in an easy way. So you will have to refer back to news articles to find out the names of the plaintiffs and that kind of thing. However, in some states, and Colorado is one, we have statewide e-filing, which means I can file my complaint from the comfort of my home if I've logged in. So we do have access that some other states don't have. And ISIS, an unfortunate name, is the state website for e-filing of court documents. Again, this is the state level. As an individual, I can't sign up for an account. However, people can go to the court and search. So if somebody says, I want to find this case, you can send them to the court and say, yes, you will be able to look it up. This is the website. There are various ways to search. You can search by attorney name. You can search by business name. You can search by person's name. And it will give you not just the docket for today, as we talked about earlier, where it's what's happening today. It will give you that case and all the activity that's happened on it. Okay, so if somebody does come into you and say, you know what, I want to sue my employer because, you know, I used some marijuana this weekend and now they're telling me I'm out the door, and I know this other guy filed and I know it's going well for him, whatever. I want to see what he filed. They would have to go to the court. But unlike many states and many locales, we actually do have statewide access to this kind of material. There are additional sources. I don't know if we've used the word treatise or not. That's a fancy word for a monograph if you're a librarian, or for a book if you're not a librarian. There are a couple of great books on municipal corporations, which is what we call cities. McQuillan, Matthews, they have various information about how ordinances are created, what kind of language you should use in an ordinance. It's the kind of thing that law libraries certainly have, so people can check with us and see who's got it. And then our own Robert Lintz has written a Colorado Lawyer article, and I would let you know that the librarians here in Colorado do write columns every so many months for the Colorado Lawyer, which is the Bar Association magazine. And it covers various types of research. So in this case, Robert has done a great one on how to research local government. Questions, concerns? Yes?
I know that some parts of counties are unincorporated. So do you have to take care, let's say you have a patron who comes in and says, my neighbor built an 8-foot monster fence, and what do I do about it? Do you have to worry about whether they're in an incorporated or unincorporated part of the county, or is that a city issue?
You would,
the dog is barking all the
right. Yes, trying to determine that piece, you're going to have to do some legwork, some research. And I think that's where sometimes you all have quite a job. You know, it's easy for us to say, no, don't tell somebody to use this court rule, you know, have them read it. But in situations like that, there may be a certain amount of assisting the person to figure out, where do you live? Who is the government who oversees that? Because remember, special districts, you know, depending what their problem is, if it's a sanitation issue, it may not be the county at all, it might be a district. Alternatively, if it's unincorporated, it's probably the county, but the county may or may not have a precise enough ordinance on that issue. And so they may have referred it to, you know, some other body that's close by. They may say, well, we incorporated the Centennial Ordinance on noise or whatever. So it may take a little legwork, because that piece is not going to be very clean. Okay. Thank you.
You're gonna get your phone here. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Margie. I have to tell you, I have tremendous respect for law firm librarians, because they get complicated questions to look at, define specific kinds of law under sometimes enormous time constraints, as the attorney is needing the information yesterday, right? So you did a great job as usual. Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of the panelists. We have covered a lot of ground in just a few short hours, and specifically they've covered a lot of ground in about a half hour to do both kind of a high-level overview of what this area of research looks like, and then to also provide some resources and some pointers in how you can grapple with these issues as you do your research and help out your patrons. If you feel overwhelmed, you should, right? It's a complicated area to research, and there's a lot to know, and we always don't know exactly where to turn to for the answers, and you need a lot of practice at it. One of the things that I asked the presenters each to do was to direct you to free resources so that you could get access to them. But it occurred to me maybe I should spend a few minutes and talk about what resources might be available if you're going to spend some money, right? If you're actually going to maybe go back to your library districts, and I hope you're listening, and buy some legal resources. What might be the essential toolkit? Well, we've talked about the Colorado Revised Statutes. Karina, in fact, has spent time on that. And you can get it free online, as she mentioned. But you can also buy a set of it from LexisNexis. You can't really see it too well on there. It's just over $300 retail price. And what's so nice about it is, of course, it has the statutory text, and it has annotations to help you find cases and cross-references to secondary authority and journal articles and what have you. The court rules and forms. It includes the court-approved forms, which you can also get on the judiciary's website. So if this is a tool which actually isn't very expensive, it's easier to use in print, I think, than it is online, and it's not expensive. So that's one thing I think I might add to my collection. NOLA Press publications. Do you all have NOLA Press publications in your libraries? Okay, so NOLA Press is essentially a law for the lay person. It is written at a level so that really anyone without legal training can pick up the book and in a particular topical area get a sense for what the law is and how it works. And it has titles like, neighbor law, for example, as opposed to, property law or something along those lines. So this is nice, and I've given you the website there. You can look at what they have. These books also aren't very expensive. You might have some of these that are for the topics that are more commonly asked, and very easy to refer patrons to and let them work on it. Here's a nice one. This is my favorite resource for doing Colorado legal research. It's called the Colorado Practice Series. It's a publication of Thomson Reuters, which used to be West and Westlaw. And it's actually a collection of treatises, or a collection of monographs, right? The main one is something called the Colorado Methods of Practice, and that's about 5, maybe 6 volumes. And it covers, at least in general, at a higher level, briefer level, many different areas of Colorado law. It's written by attorneys, principally for attorneys, but at a level really anyone can understand. And it provides the very necessary cross-references to Colorado case law and statutory law and regulations, and kind of gives you the lay of the land. Beyond the methods of practice part of it, there are then individual volumes, 1 or 2 volumes, or at least individual titles, looking at topical areas like appellate law or civil rules, domestic relations, which is family law, property law, employment law, etc. So what they might cover in the methods of practice part in a chapter or 2 chapters, they'll cover in an entire volume in the individual titles. So it's much more in-depth information. The downside of it is it's very expensive. It's not a cheap resource, but it's a very good one, and it's updated annually with pocket parts in print. And it is available on Westlaw. I'll talk about that in a second. In fact, now.
And I think you can buy individual volumes. So if you have a lot of, there's one on elder law, for instance, and there's one on domestic relations. So if you end up with some very, a lot of patrons who have divorce issues or older parents, you can buy just 2 volumes, and that might be helpful. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right. So you don't have to buy the entire massive set. It's great. It's a great set. Westlaw Next Patron Access. This is also a good resource. We have 3 of these terminals for our patrons. And what's nice about it is will provide you, depending on how you do your subscription with Thomson Reuters, with the West Group again, you can certainly get all of the Colorado primary law, right? Statutes, cases, regulations. You can get Colorado secondary authority, like the practice series that's on there. And importantly, forms, Colorado-based forms specifically. And then you can broaden that subscription to national primary authority. So you can get this cases, statutes, regulations from all the other 49 jurisdictions and the federal government.
and then a nice collection of secondary authority. Principally, it's this AmJur secondary authority. AmJur is American Jurisprudence. It was a separate publisher and publication years ago from West, and then West absorbed them. But it's a legal encyclopedia, and then there's some other parts to the set for both litigation and also for practice forms, litigation forms, and AmJur trials, and the whole bunch. I'm not exactly sure what the pricing is on this. We subscribe to it, but because we buy so much material from West, they give us a discount, and I'm sure your folks can work that all out. So this is a nice tool, has nice search capabilities. It's something you can set a patron in front of and have them go to town. So those are the kinds of resources that I think that might be useful in your library. We're available too. We're resources, and on the seminar website, I put under the resources tab, there is a page that includes links to all of our area law libraries, both to our catalogs, to our research guides, and then to the services that we provide. Karina has done a great job talking about some of the resources available at DU. CU, same thing. We really have everything, right? We're the largest law library in the Rocky Mountain region. We have all the Colorado materials, the codes dating back to the Territorial Code of 1868, all the session laws, a lot of the regulations, and loads and loads of secondary authority as well. So, and we have a document delivery service. We tend to digitize the materials and we'll email them to you. And we're happy to provide that. We're happy to provide that service and provide that research. So you should feel like you're not alone. You are not alone in this endeavor. And that if you certainly as a front line can handle the question, fantastic. If you want backup, call us or email us, all of us. And we'll be happy to help you out, to take that query on and to respond to you so you can respond to your patron and provide the kind of service that your patrons expect you to provide. Karina, would you like to add anything before I turn this over to questions?
Oh, no, just that we do have, you'll notice on our website that we have something called the Colorado Law Project. Those are research guides that are geared towards public patrons. They're written for the public, whereas our legislative history guide is written more for our students and attorneys. So I really suggest going to our research guides, and you'll see in the subject listings, Colorado Law Project. Click on that, and they'll list a number of topics that are common for public patrons. There's a tenant landlord guide, animal law guide. So those have been really helpful whenever we get public patrons in. We steer them to those resources.
And the DU's Colorado Law Project, I am really envious. I would love to have done that here at CU. It's a nice resource. We're also available to help you use the resources too. You should feel free to call upon us. Something like the Westlaw Next Patron Access. I know that's a little bit more complicated as you might imagine and to use. And if you all ever need training on that, you should feel free to contact us. And I'm sure we can arrange something that would work for everybody. We'd be happy to do that as well. So we are ahead of schedule, which gives us plenty of time to answer any questions that you all might have. And let me turn it over to you and let me fire up this queue here. I think I have a Q&A queue. And let me poll anyone in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
You said you like international law, right?
Yes.
I wanted to ask if the expats in certain countries are very worried, American, because they said that you are going to have a new law that these people have to pay taxes on the money they get from, not only from home, but only also from their second country. And I don't don't know where to find that. Somebody told me, one of them said that, I'm not a librarian. One of them told me that it would become into effect in 2017. But people are very worried about the idea of having to pay double taxation. I guess that's what
Right.
it is.
And this is a new law being passed by the U.S., so it would apply to foreign
Right.
nationals within the U.S. That's probably going to be on the State Department's page or the IRS page, probably both. But I would look at newspaper articles first to see what laws they're referencing, and then from there try to find whatever tax code provision or if it was a statutory amendment from there. So that would be U.S. research. It's not international research. It's U.S. unless they're violating a international double taxation code, which they could be. Yeah. So.
Great
All right,
question.
thank you
Yeah.
very much.
That was a
Yeah,
good question.
exactly.
Yeah.
I see a question from someone online. Does the American Legal Code contain codes for Colorado? I think you mean the United States Code. The United States Code would actually not contain codes for Colorado. That would be a federal code. And the Colorado codes would be the Colorado Revised Statutes that we want to look at that way. And then I have another question, Margie, actually it might be for you. Can you talk briefly about public records requests from local governments? What if someone needs emails exchanged by their counselors on an issue discussed by the council? It's this question here.
There is something that is not just municipal, but also state and even federal, which is called a FOIA request, Freedom of Information request. And often you may see some information that's very tempting on a website and it looks like it's going to answer your question. And then it may say, to obtain these documents, submit a FOIA request. And that is the right of the government to do that. They can say, we're not making everything absolutely public. Certain things will be available, but you have to request them. They can put the restrictions on that. You may have to request it in writing. You may have to do it by mail instead of by email. You may have to submit some money in good faith ahead of time, depending what they have decided. So often you might have to talk to people at the local government level, find out what their requirements are, and then follow through on all that paperwork in order to get a document or to get additional information.
All right. I have no other questions on the online queue, but feel free to ask away if you'd like. Anyone here in the room? Questions? Any particularly challenging patron stories you'd like to tell without giving away any confidences? No, we're still recording, right? Yeah, we don't want to do that. Yeah.
One of the things that got me interested in this was that I did have a woman who said that her daughter's parental rights had been terminated.
Mm-hmm.
And she felt that the caseworker had misrepresented.
Yeah.
I really didn't know where to start with that. And we did have access to the legal unit that could help her, and that's what we ended up doing, was referring her to them.
Yeah.
None of us knew where to start with.
So the question in the room was that a patron came and had her daughter's parental rights were terminated, or okay, and what to do about that. That's sort of one of those vague questions, and you're thinking to yourself while you're smiling and nodding your head to the patron, where do I even start with that kind of a problem? And that's a hard one. And it sounds like the way you resolved it, which was to refer it to someone maybe, and that's perfectly an acceptable answer too. And I'll do this. I'll say your problem really is kind of complicated, a little bit beyond what you can get out of the law library research and do on your own. There are these legal aid organizations. You might have to really go to an attorney on that. And I will say this is a piece of advice. Do not be afraid to say you're not a lawyer and you don't give legal advice. I will do that. I am a lawyer. I'm licensed to practice law in Florida, not in Colorado. And I'll kind of jokingly, say to someone, well, I can't give you legal advice, and really you don't want me to give you legal advice. Just sort of let them know that they're maybe asking a little too much from us, and then direct them to maybe a subject-oriented secondary authority of some kind, or form online, and or not a specific form, but maybe a site online, and see if I can help them out. That's a tough question. Yeah.
I'm actually a retired librarian, and what I truly understand is how under the gun you feel when you get that kind of question. I have a new volunteer position. I work in the district attorney's office here in this district in the community protection division. So we do a lot of we take complaints from consumers. And and it's all learning as you go. One of the first things I had, you're talking about something interesting, is this man said, I bought a new house. I got one of those insurance policies on this house because I didn't know what had happened to this house. And my furnace went out and I was denied coverage by my insurance company. So because it's volunteer, I have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
Look into this.
Yeah.
And it turned out the furnace was one that, I think it was this AC which is regulated from the federal level and the state level. And I could go back to that insurance company and say, hey, the guy you brought in, I have no way, because his invoice is so bad. It doesn't look like you followed any regulations when you serviced this. And eventually, they came back and said, okay, we will give you up to the limit of what your policy allowed for this.
Well, that's
So
quite nice service you did there. Yeah, nice. Yeah.
But it's plowing through all of this, seeing just what we're talking about, seeing what applies, who in the county can help you with this, because Boulder County has somebody who's in charge of whether furnaces get regulated and if they're putting CFCs or putting the right refrigerant in it. And they were also happy to step in. So
yeah.
I think actually that's a very critical point of this kind of research. Everybody who's younger than I am believes that we can just hit one click. One click is going to get it. And that in this area of research, that is not the case. One click would be a miracle.
Yeah.
So it's really an involved process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Margie also brings up about setting expectations for your patrons. So this isn't going to be necessarily a simple, here's the book, or here's the law, here's the statute. It might get quite involved. I think sometimes of a hospital analogy. Essentially, we're providing patrons with access to a hospital and medical equipment and everything they need, and then telling them to perform surgery on themselves and saying, good luck, right? Good luck with that, because we can't help you with the surgeon that part of it. So it can be quite hard, yeah.
And don't be afraid to say, I am not a lawyer. I cannot help you like a lawyer can. I just had a patron in this past week who came in. He's been representing himself for 4 years. Very knowledgeable, but right out of his mouth is, I need to know how I would say that this case is precedent over this case. And he just keeps asking me these questions. And I kept saying, I can't answer that for you, sir. That would be giving legal advice. I can give you a book that talks about common law system principles. But he, it really was to the point where he needed an attorney. And I had to say that. I was like, if you don't understand this, then you really need to talk to an attorney about this. Because I knew that the questions he was asking were not in any book, really. It wasn't going to be answered by a case per se. And I'm very frank with my patrons. I say, I can't answer that. That's giving legal advice, and I cannot do that. So don't be afraid of doing that. And I know there was a question about forms, where to find legal forms, and how much do you help people find legal forms. Very, very touchy. I would never give them a specific form. We have tons of form books at the law library. We can show them the form book, show them the index, tell them here's where you would look for these types of forms, but I would never give them a specific form. We also at the reference desk have something called the Legal Resource Directory, which is a 80-page directory that lists all the legal services departments and agencies in Colorado. And so when somebody needs help, a lot of times what I'll do is print out the section for, say, Veterans Affairs, if they're asking questions for veteran services or legal services. I'll print out the couple pages that list every single free resource, free legal service that they can go to, and I will give them that, because at least they're going away with something.
If you look at Google too, if you're looking at a specific area within the law, a lot of times at big law libraries, that's what a lot of the librarians are creating, like research guides and that sort of thing. So if you go to Google and put like immigration law research guide, you'll get a lot of hits on there from a lot of really big law libraries, right? And that's kind of a good place to start, because sometimes they'll put that information in there and kind of link it the way that, here's the primary material, here's the secondary material, and here's how to, they even might even have some books that they recommend or in a particular subject. So that's one way that you can people can come away with something if they're looking in there. Or like if you have maybe just students coming in there, like, I want to write a report on, or I want to do this type of research to write on, that's kind of a way to get them entry into something like that as well. Yeah. Because research, imparting knowledge for research, even to the students that we teach, is something big too. I mean, there's a case that I use in class that it was from our Fifth Circuit, but it was in the footnote, the judge is like chastising the attorney for not looking up the Code of Federal Regulation on a particular matter involving a veterans hospital. And the problem was the delivery of a child. And so because they didn't go through, they used all the other information, but in the CFR, there was a part, what exactly to plead. And because of it, the money amounts that they were going to be able to have in that particular situation for what had gone on in that improper delivery, they kind of disqualified themselves. And so the judge was almost setting up the case for, this is how you could sue your lawyer.
Thanks, Your Honor. Yeah, sure. Sarah, you had a question?
Yes. If we have patrons that want to do like a small claims kind of thing,
Yep.
Are there any good resources or ways to direct them? Because I assume you don't normally take a lawyer to that, and they're going to be preparing their own.
Well, a couple of thoughts immediately come down. So the question is, if you have a patron with a small claims question, right? How do you deal with that? Two things come to mind. One is there are rules in the Colorado Revised Statutes specifically for small claims courts. And those rules are simplified forms or methods of procedure different from the district courts. And they'll give you information like jurisdictional amounts and how you file. And it makes it easier on people when they go to small claims courts. The second is I have to mind a book, a NOLO Press publication on going to small claims court. So what you could do if you don't have that, you can jump on our catalogs and see if we have it, and then we can, or in that case, even the nolo.com website, and then you can send it to you via ILL, or we can, send you a chapter out of it or something, whatever that could be. So that might be a way to handle that. And also, that one is probably one you might Google, right?
Yeah, I would Google it. Small claims court. I actually believe we have a Colorado Law Project LibGuide on small claims courts, which will give you all the different references that the books, like the NOLO book, I think we have that on there. It will kind of, looking for secondary sources to help them. What they're going to have to do, though, is research what law applies. And that's the hardest part. And at that point, if you hit a wall, send them to the Colorado Law the Colorado Supreme Court Library or one of the other law libraries, and we can kind of help them from there. But yeah, I would start with just Googling research guides on small claims courts within Colorado, and look up the rules. The rules are online.
There's also,
Yeah.
I mean, this district, they have someone called they pay someone called the self-represented litigant coordinator who will work with people filling out the forms, if they have any questions about the process. And I don't know if that's represented in every district, but I would think there would be something. And I know they have seminars about how to proceed in small claims court in this district. It might be in other ones where they talk about how to do it on both sides, you know. And there's another one on collections, which is the other side of small claims.
Yeah.
But I am not an
Right.
expert. I'm not. Well, self-represented litigant coordinator. They used to call it pro se.
Yes, I'm sorry. The self-represented litigant is another, I think it's the more modern phrase for pro se litigant, exactly. So that's nice that that resource is available. I don't know how broadly it's available around the state, but it's great that it is. I know I worked briefly for the Colorado Supreme Court Law Library some years ago, and part of what I did is I visited about half of the state's judicial districts, and I met with their district clerk, basically, and looked at what resources that they have available and how we could help them as a Supreme Court library. And so that kind of a resource is really nice that someone might be available for those folks. Yeah.
Translators there all the time because so much
Yeah.
of this is, you know, as you know now, you know, people that only speak one language and it's not English, and helping those folks is super important. They're sort of like the underrepresented group in, you know, Colorado.
Okay, any other questions? There are none really in the queue. So at this point, let me absolutely thank you for coming out and for participating online. And I will send you all a follow-up email with two things in it. One is a link to a survey to get your feedback on how this worked and what you'd like to see done differently. And secondly, a link to the recording. It looks like I've successfully recorded this. And so I'll make that available online as well. And then lastly, for anyone who would like to, I will lead a tour of the law library. You can look at some of these resources and be happy to answer whatever any questions you might have. So with that, we're going to shut it all down. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Because you know what happened was when I looked up and